Pardon was not a special man. He knew this about himself, and he had made peace with it long ago. He was 34 years old, average height, average build, with a face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. He had worked many jobs in his life. Factory worker, night watchman, delivery driver. None of them had made him rich. None of them had made him famous. But they had kept him alive, and that was enough. When he saw the job posting for a security guard position on Galactic Sanctuary Station Orion 7, he applied without thinking too hard about it. The pay was decent. The work seemed simple. Watch over rescued alien species while they recovered before being sent home. He did not need to feed them or heal them or talk to them. He just needed to stand guard and make sure nothing went wrong. The journey to Orion 7 took 3 weeks. Do-han spent most of it sleeping and reading an old paperback book he had, brought from Earth. It was a simple story about a fisherman and the sea. He had read it many times before. The words felt like old friends. When he arrived at the station, he was surprised by how big it was. Orion 7 was a massive structure that floated in the darkness between stars. Thousands of species passed through its halls. Some were being treated for injuries. Others were learning to trust again after being rescued from slavers or war zones. The station was part hospital, part sanctuary, and part second chance. The director of the station was an insectoid alien named Crix. Crix had 6 legs, compound eyes that glittered like black diamonds, and a voice that clicked and buzzed when he spoke. He looked frightening, but his manner was tired and professional. "You will be assigned to Ward 17, Crix told Do-han during his first meeting. 3 Velani cubs. Do you know what Velani are? Do-han shook his head. Crix pulled up an image on a floating screen. Do-han saw creatures that looked like a mix between foxes and otters. They had 6 legs, long fluffy tails, and fur that seemed to shimmer with different colors. Their eyes were large and golden, like little suns. "They are beautiful," Do-han said quietly. "They are dangerous," Crix replied. "These 3 are the last survivors of their clan. Slavers killed the rest. The cubs were found hiding in a cargo container. They were starving, dehydrated, and traumatized beyond measure." Crix clicked his mandibles together, a sound that Do-han would later learn meant frustration. "We have tried 12 caretakers. 12. The cubs attack anyone who comes close. They bite, they scratch, they scream. 3 of my staff members are still recovering from their injuries. And you want me to care for them?" Do-han asked. "No," Crix said firmly. "I want you to guard them. Stand outside the enclosure. Watch the door. Do not enter. Do not engage. Do not try to be their friend. Just be there. That is all." Do-han understood. He was not being hired to help the cubs. He was being hired to fill a shift that no one else wanted. He was a body to stand in a hallway and do nothing. "I can do that," he said. Crix studied him with those glittering compound eyes. "Most humans say that. Most humans fail. The cubs are unsettling. Their cries can be heard through the walls. Some guards have quit within hours. I will not quit," Do-han said. He did not say it with confidence or pride. He said it as a simple fact. He had nowhere else to go. His first shift began that night. Ward 17 was at the far end of the station, away from the busier sections. The hallway was quiet and dim. The enclosure was large, with thick glass walls that allowed staff to observe the cubs without entering. Inside, Do-han could see a space designed to look like a forest. There were trees made of synthetic materials, a small stream of recycled water, and soft moss covering the ground. And there, huddled in the far corner, were the 3 cubs. They were smaller than he expected. The biggest one was about the size of a large dog. The smallest was barely larger than a cat. Their fur was dull and matted. nothing like the shimmering images Crix had shown him. Their golden eyes were wide and wild with fear. When they saw Dawn approach, they reacted immediately. The biggest cub bared its teeth and let out a sound that was half growl, half scream. The middle cub pressed itself against the wall. The smallest one simply stared, frozen like a statue. Dohan stopped walking. He was still several meters from the glass. He looked at the cubs, and they looked at him. The growling continued, low and threatening. Slowly, without making any sudden movements, Dohan sat down on the floor. He leaned his back against the opposite wall. He pulled his old paperback book from his pocket, and he began to read. The growling faltered, then stopped. Dohan did not look up. He kept his eyes on the pages, moving through the familiar words about the fisherman and his boat and the endless sea. He read silently, his lips barely moving. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then two. When Dohan finally glanced up, he saw something that made his heart skip. The smallest cub had moved. It was no longer in the corner. It had crept forward, just a little, and was now sitting near the glass. Its golden eyes were fixed on him. Dohan did not smile. He did not wave. He did not speak. He simply looked at the cub for a moment, then returned to his book. The cub did not move closer, but it did not retreat either. When his shift ended 6 hours later, Dohan stood up slowly. He tucked his book back into his pocket. He looked at the enclosure one more time. The smallest cub was still watching him. The other two had stopped hiding and were now visible near the middle of the space. "Good night," Dohan said softly. It was the first word he had spoken since sitting down. He walked away. Behind him, in the enclosure, the smallest cub pressed its paw against the glass where the strange human had been sitting. It stayed there for a long time, staring at the empty hallway, waiting for something it did not yet understand. And somewhere deep in its broken little heart, a tiny seed of something new began to grow. It was not trust. Not yet. It was something smaller and more fragile. It was curiosity. And that, as it turned out, was enough to begin. 3 weeks passed on Station Orion 7, and Park Dohan kept his promise. He did not quit. Every night, he walked towards 17. Every night, he sat in the same spot on the floor across from the enclosure. Every night, he read his old book about the fisherman and the sea. Sometimes, he finished the whole thing and started again from the beginning. The words never got boring. They were comfortable, like a warm blanket on a cold night. The cubs began to change. It happened slowly. So slowly that Dohan almost did not notice at first. On the third night, the smallest cub sat near the glass again. On the fifth night, the middle cub joined it. By the end of the first week, all 3 cubs would gather near the glass whenever Dohan arrived, watching him with their large golden eyes. They still did not trust him. When other staff members walked past the enclosure, the cubs would scatter and hide, growling and hissing. But when Dohan was there, they were calm. They watched him like he was the most interesting thing in the universe. Dohan gave them names in his head. He knew he was not supposed to get attached. He knew they were not his responsibility. But he could not help it. The smallest one, with her delicate paws and curious eyes, he called Bomi. It meant spring in Korean. She reminded him of the first flowers that bloomed after a long winter. The middle one, who had golden fur that caught the light like sunshine, he called Taeyang. It meant sun. And the largest one, the aggressive male who still growled at Dohan even while watching him, he called Hanyul. It meant sky. Hanyul was wild and endless, full of storms that had not yet passed. On the 10th night, Dohan did something different. He finished a chapter of his book and found himself humming. It was an old Korean lullaby that his grandmother used to sing to him when he was a child. He had not thought about it in years. The melody came out of him naturally, soft and low. Inside the enclosure, all three cubs went very still. Bomi tilted her head. Her ears, which Doan had never seen move before, rotated toward him like small satellite dishes. Taiyang made a sound in his throat, a quiet chirp that Dohan had never heard from any of them. Even Haniel stopped growling and simply listened. Doan kept humming. The lullaby was simple. It was about the moon watching over sleeping children, keeping them safe through the long night. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, warm and kind. When the song ended, Dohan looked up. The cubs were pressed against the glass, closer than they had ever been before. Bomi's paw was touching the surface where Dohan sat on the other side. Dohan did not think. He simply acted. He raised his hand and pressed his palm against the glass, matching her paw. They stayed like that for a long time. Neither moved. Neither made a sound. It was the quietest moment Dohan had experienced in years, and somehow also the loudest. He could feel something passing between them through the glass. It was not words. It was not touch. It was something deeper than both thought. When Doan finally pulled his hand away, Bomi let out a small whimper. It was the saddest sound he had ever heard. "I am still here," he whispered. "I am not going anywhere." The next night, Taiyang did something remarkable. When Doan began to hum the lullaby, Taiyang tried to hum along. It was not a good sound. It was broken and warbling, the notes all wrong. But it was unmistakably an attempt to copy the melody. Duhan stopped humming in surprise. Taiyang stopped too, looking at him with wide eyes, as if afraid he had done something wrong. No, Doan said gently. "Keep going." That was good. He started the lullaby again. This time, Taiyang joined in from the beginning. Bomi added her own soft sounds. Even Haniel, standing in the back, made a low rumbling noise that might have been his version of singing. Dohan felt something break inside his chest. It was not a bad break. It was the kind of break that happens when a wall you did not know you had finally falls down. Dr. Vel, the station xenobiologist, discovered the bond by accident. She was a tall avian alien with feathers the color of dark water and eyes like polished amber. She had been monitoring the cubs remotely since their arrival, documenting their behavior and looking for any sign of improvement. One night, she came to Ward 17 in person to check her equipment. She found Doan sitting on the floor, humming softly, with all three cubs pressed against the glass in front of him. Their eyes were half closed. They looked peaceful. They looked, for the first time since their rescue, like cubs instead of survivors. Dr. Vel stood frozen in the hallway, afraid to move and break the moment. She returned the next night, and the night after that. She watched from a distance, taking notes, recording everything. What she saw should have been impossible. Velani were known throughout the galaxy for their intense clan bonds. They only trusted their birth families. They only loved those who shared their blood. Outsiders were enemies. Strangers were threats. That was simply how their species worked. But these three cubs were not following the rules. They had imprinted on a human. A quiet, unremarkable human who sat on the floor and read books and hummed old songs. They had let him into their broken hearts, and they had done it without anyone asking them to. Dr. Vel wanted to report this. She wanted to study it. She wanted to write papers about it and share it with the galaxy. But she also saw how fragile the bond was. How the cubs still flinched at every other person. How they only relaxed when Doan was there. She understood that pulling this flower up by its roots to examine it would kill it. So she said nothing. She made notes. And she watched. On the 21st night, Haniel finally stopped growling at Doan. He walked to the glass and sat down next to his siblings. He did not press his paw against the surface like Bomi did. He did not try to sing like Taiyang. But he was there, present, no longer fighting. Dohan looked at the big cub, and nodded slowly. "Hello, Haniel," he said. "It is nice to finally meet you." Haniel blinked his golden eyes. Then, for the first time since his family was killed, he lay down and closed his eyes while a stranger watched. He slept and Dohan, his heart so full it hurt, stayed awake all night to guard his dreams. The message came during Dohan's rest period. He was lying in his small quarters, staring at the metal ceiling, thinking about the cubs. He had been doing that a lot lately. Thinking about Bomi and her curious eyes. Thinking about Taiyang and his broken little songs. Thinking about Haniel and the trust that had taken so long to build. His communication device buzzed. It was a message from Earth. Duhan, read it once. Then twice. Then a third time, because the words did not seem real. His mother was dying. She had been sick for years. He knew this. He had left Earth partly because staying there and watching her fade away was more than he could bear. He had told himself that distance would make it easier. He had told himself that he was not running away. He had been lying to himself. The message was from his younger sister, Jian. Their mother had collapsed 2 days ago. The doctor said she had maybe 72 hours left. If Dohan wanted to say goodbye, he needed to come home now. He sat up in his bed. His hands were shaking. His chest felt like someone had filled it with stones. 72 hours. The fastest transport to Earth would take at least 8 days. Even if he left right now, he would not make it in time for goodbye. But he might make it for the funeral. He might make it to hold his sister. He might make it to stand by the grave and say the things he should have said years ago. He had to go. Duhan went to Director Crix's office immediately. The insectoid director listened to his request with those glittering compound eyes and nodded without hesitation. "Emergency leave is granted," Crix said. "You have 1 month. Your position will be held. I am sorry for your loss." Dohan thanked him and turned to leave. Then he stopped. "The cubs," he said. "Who will watch them while I am gone?" Crix clicked his mandibles. "I will assign another guard. Do not worry. They are just animals. They will adjust." Dohan wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that they were not just animals, that they were children who had lost everything, that they trusted him in a way they trusted no one else. But what could he say? He was just a guard. He had no authority. He had no right to demand anything. "Please," he said quietly. "Please be gentle with them." Crix stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once more. "Go. Be with your family." Dohan went towards 17 one last time before his transport left. It was not his shift. The hallway was empty and dark. But the cubs were awake. They always seemed to know when he was nearby. All 3 of them were pressed against the glass, watching the hallway with their golden eyes. When they saw him, Bomi let out a happy chirp. Taiyang began to hum, that broken melody he had learned from Dohan's lullabies. Even Haniel stood tall and alert, his tail swishing behind him. Dohan walked to the glass and knelt down. He pressed his palm against the surface. All 3 cubs rushed to meet it, their paws touching the glass where his hand rested. "I have to go," Dohan whispered. His voice cracked. "My mother is sick. She is dying. I have to go home and say goodbye." The cubs did not understand his words. They could not. But they understood his tone. They understood the sadness in his voice and the tears forming in his eyes. Bomi whimpered. Taiyang stopped humming. Haniel pressed his forehead against the glass, as if trying to push through it to reach him. "I will come back," Dohan said. "I promise. Wait for me. Please, wait for me." He stayed there for as long as he could. Then he pulled his hand away, stood up, and walked toward the transport bay. He did not look back. He could not. If he looked back, he would not be able to leave. Behind him, he heard Bomi cry out. It was a sharp, painful sound that echoed through the empty hallway. It followed him all the way to his transport. It stayed in his ears long after the ship jumped to light speed. 6 hours after Dawn left, the cubs stopped eating. The new guard was a Krethian named Vaughn. He was large and strong, with thick gray skin and 4 arms. He had experience with dangerous animals. Crix thought he would be perfect. Vonn approached the enclosure with a tray of food. The cubs had not eaten since their regular feeding time. The staff was concerned when Vaughn opened the door and stepped inside. Haniel attacked. The big cub moved faster than anyone expected. He launched himself at Vaughn with claws extended and teeth bared. He bit down on Vaughn's arm hard enough to draw blood. He scratched and kicked and screamed with a rage that seemed impossible for such a small creature. Vaughn barely escaped. He slammed the door shut behind him, leaving the food tray scattered across the floor. His arm was bleeding badly. He was shaking. "Those things are monsters," he gasped. "I am not going back in there." 12 hours passed. The cubs did not touch the food. They did not drink the water. They huddled together in the far corner of the enclosure, the same corner where they had hidden when they first arrived. 24 hours passed. The staff tried everything. They sent different species to approach the enclosure. They tried leaving food at the door. They tried playing soothing music. Nothing worked. 40-8 hours passed, and the cubs began to wail. It started as a low sound, almost like humming, but it grew louder and more desperate. It was not a growl or a scream. It was something worse. It was grief. Pure, raw, endless grief. The sound traveled through the walls and floors of the station. Staff members in other wards could hear it. Patients in the medical bay could hear it. Even Director Crix, in his office at the center of the station, could hear the distant echo of 3 small cubs crying for someone who was gone. Dr. Vel ran tests. The cubs were not sick. They were not injured. Physically, there was nothing wrong with them. But they were dying anyway. They were dying from heartbreak. It is a documented phenomenon in Villani, she explained to Crix. When they lose their clan, they can choose to stop living. Their bodies simply give up. It is called defading. Crix clicked his mandibles in frustration. They have not lost their clan. Their clan was already dead. Why would this happen now? Dr. Vel looked at him with her amber eyes. Because their clan was not dead. Not to them. Their clan was a human named Park Dawn, and he left. And they do not understand why. Crix was silent for a long time. Can we bring him back? He finally asked. He is on Earth. His mother is dying. We cannot ask him to abandon his family for 3 alien cubs. Then what do we do? Dr. Vel had no answer. She looked through the glass at the 3 small forms huddled together, their cries growing weaker with each passing hour. The smallest one, the one with the curious eyes, had stopped wailing. She was too weak. She lay still on the ground, her fur dull and lifeless, her breathing slow and shallow. Dr. Vel pressed her wing against the glass, as if she could reach through and comfort them. We wait, she said, and we hope. But hope was a fragile thing, and with every hour that passed, it grew smaller and smaller, like a candle burning down to nothing in the endless dark. Park Dawn buried his mother on a rainy Tuesday in a small cemetery outside Seoul. The funeral was quiet. Only a handful of people came. His sister Jiyeon stood beside him, holding an umbrella over both of them. She had gotten thinner since he left. There were lines on her face that had not been there before. She looked like their mother. When the ceremony ended, they walked back to their childhood home. It was a small house with a garden that their mother had loved. The flowers were still blooming. Dohan remembered helping her plant them when he was a boy. She would hum while she worked, the same lullaby she used to sing to him at night. You look different. Jian said as they sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Sadder, but also different in another way. Like something matters to you now. Dohan thought about the cubs. He thought about Bomi pressing her paw against the glass. He thought about Taiyang trying to sing. He thought about Haniel finally trusting him enough to sleep. There are people who need me, he said quietly. Not people. Not exactly. But close enough. Jian studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Then you should go back to them. But I will be fine. She smiled, and it was their mother's smile. I have been fine for years without you here. I can keep being fine. But if there are people who need you, really need you, then you should not let them wait. Dohan stayed 3 more days. He helped Jian clean the house. He visited the grave one more time. He stood in his childhood bedroom and looked at the books on the shelves, the posters on the walls. All the pieces of a life he had left behind on. Then he booked the fastest transport he could find back to Orion 7. It cost almost all of his savings. He did not care. The journey took 8 days. 8 days of sitting in a small cabin, staring at the stars through a tiny window, wondering if he was already too late. He tried to sleep, but could not. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Bomi's cry echoing through the hallway as he left. When his transport finally docked at Orion 7, Dohan did not stop to check in. He did not go to his quarters. He did not report to Director Crix. He walked straight toward 17, still wearing the same black suit he had worn to his mother's funeral. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. The wailing that Dr. Vell had described in her messages to him had stopped 3 hours ago. The silence was worse. Dohan's legs felt weak. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. He turned the corner and saw the enclosure. The cubs were there. All 3 of them. But they were not moving. They lay in a small pile in the center of the enclosure, their bodies pressed together for warmth. Their fur was matted and dull. Their eyes were closed. They looked so small, so fragile, so close to gone. Dohan fell to his knees in front of the glass. He pressed both palms against it. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Only a broken sound, half sob, half prayer. Please, he whispered. Please wake up, please. I came back. I promised I would come back. Please. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. The cubs did not stir. The silence pressed down on him like a weight. Dohan felt something inside him crack, a grief so deep it had no bottom. Then Bomi's ear twitched. It was a small movement. Tiny. Almost nothing. But Dohan saw it. He held his breath, not daring to hope. Slowly, painfully, Bomi lifted her head. Her golden eyes opened. They were cloudy and unfocused. She looked around the enclosure, confused, like someone waking from a long nightmare. Then she saw Dohan. Her eyes cleared. Her ears went straight up. She let out a sound that was not a cry or a wail or a scream. It was a chirp. A happy, disbelieving, joyful chirp. Taiyang's head came up next. He blinked at the glass, saw Dohan, and began to make that broken humming sound. But now it did not sound broken. It sounded like coming home. Hanul was the last to wake. He rose slowly, his legs shaking beneath him. He was the weakest of the 3, the one who had fought the hardest against the guards, the one who had burned through his energy faster than the others. But when he saw Dohan, something changed in his eyes. The wildness faded. The fear melted away. He walked forward on unsteady legs and pressed his forehead against the glass. Dohan was crying. He could not stop. Tears ran down his face and dripped onto the floor. His hands were still pressed against the glass, and all 3 cubs gathered on the other side, pressing back. I am sorry, he said. I am so sorry. I should not have left. I should have found another way. I am sorry. The cubs did not understand his words, but they understood his voice. They understood his presence. They understood that he had come back, just like he promised. Dr. Vell found them like that 20 minutes later. She had been running towards 17 after the monitors showed sudden activity in the cubs' vital signs. What she found stopped her in her tracks. The human was kneeling on the floor, his hands against the glass, tears streaming down his face. On the other side, 3 Villani cubs who had been hours from death were now standing, pressing close to the glass, their eyes bright and alert. Bomi was eating. She had crawled to the food tray that had been left in the enclosure days ago. The food was stale now, but she did not care. She was taking small bites, chewing slowly, her eyes never leaving Dawn. Taiyang joined her moments later. Then Haniel, moving slowly but moving nonetheless. Dr. Vell leaned against the wall and watched. Her scientific mind was racing, trying to understand what she was seeing. This should not be possible. The cubs had been too far gone. Their bodies had been shutting down. No amount of food or medicine should have been able to bring them back. But here they were, eating and drinking and living, all because one human had walked into the hallway and sat down. How? She whispered to herself. How is this possible? Dawn did not hear her. He did not see her. His entire world had shrunk to the 3 small creatures on the other side of the glass. He stayed there on his knees for hours, watching them eat, watching them drink, watching them slowly come back to life. He did not move until his legs went numb. He did not speak until his voice came back. And even then, he only said one thing over and over, like a promise and a prayer. I am here. I am not leaving. I am here. And the cubs, full for the first time in over a week, curled up together by the glass and slept. Their breathing was steady. Their hearts were strong. And in their dreams, they were not alone anymore. They never would be again. Word spread quickly through Station Orion 7. Everyone heard about the human guard and the Villani cubs. Everyone heard about how they had nearly died from grief. Everyone heard about how they came back to life the moment he returned. The story traveled beyond the station too. Ships carried it to other sanctuaries, other planets, other corners of the galaxy. Scientists discussed it in research papers. Diplomats mentioned it in meetings. Poets wrote songs about it. And at the center of it all, Park Doan just kept doing his job. He sat in the same spot every night. He read his book. He hummed his lullabies. The only difference now was that he no longer sat outside the enclosure. Director Crix had given him permission to go inside. The first time Doan opened the door and stepped through, his heart was pounding. The cubs had never been in the same space as him without glass between them. He did not know how they would react. Mummy reached him first. She crossed the enclosure in seconds, her 6 legs moving in a blur. She jumped up and pressed her paws against his chest, her face level with his. Her golden eyes stared into his brown ones from inches away. Then she licked his nose. Doan laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and warm, the first one he had made in longer than he could remember. He wrapped his arms around Bomi and held her close. She was lighter than he expected, but warm and solid and alive. Taiyang came next, pressing against Dohan's leg and making happy humming sounds. Haniel was slower, more careful. He approached from the side and sniffed at Dohan's hand. Then, finally, he leaned his heavy head against Dohan's palm and closed his eyes. Dr. Vell watched through the glass, recording everything. This is unprecedented, she said to Director Crix, who stood beside her. Villani do not bond with outsiders. Their brain chemistry literally does not allow it. But these 3 have formed a full clan bond with a human. I have scanned their neural patterns. To them, he is not a stranger. He is family. Crix clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. What does this mean for their rehabilitation? It means everything has changed. Dr. Vel turned to look at him. They cannot be returned to a Volani colony. They would not survive separation from him. If we send them to their homeworld without him, they will go through the fating again. And next time, we might not be able to stop it. Then what do we do? Dr. Vel looked back at the enclosure, where Dohan was now sitting on the ground with all 3 cubs piled in his lap. He was reading his book out loud, and the cubs were listening with expressions of perfect contentment. We let him take them home, she said. Wherever he goes, they go. That is the only way. 1 week later, Director Crix called Dohan to his office. I am offering you a new position, Crix said. Lead guardian of Ward 17. You will have full authority over the cubs' care and rehabilitation. Better pay. Better quarters. A real job, not just standing guard. Dohan was quiet for a moment. And when it is time for them to leave, when they are ready to be released, that is what I wanted to discuss. Crix leaned back in his chair. The Volani High Council has reviewed the situation. They have declared the cubs' bond with you to be legitimate and binding. As far as they are concerned, you are a member of their species now. An honorary Volani. Dohan stared at him. I do not understand. It means that when the cubs are ready to leave, you can go with them. To their homeworld. To help rebuild what was lost. Crix paused. It also means you would be leaving Earth behind. Leaving your own species behind. It is not a small decision. Dohan thought about his mother's grave in the rain. He thought about his sister's face when she told him to go. He thought about all the years he had spent drifting, looking for something to hold on to, never finding it. Then he thought about Bomi's paw against a glass. About Taiyang's broken lullabies. About Haniel finally learning to trust. I accept, he said. The years that followed were not easy. But they were good. Dohan worked at Station Orion 7 for 3 more years, helping the cubs grow strong and healthy. Other stations began requesting human guards for their most difficult cases. Scientists studied what made humans special, why they could form bonds that crossed species lines when so few others could. Some said it was because humans were warm-blooded, and their body heat was comforting. Some said it was their voices, low and steady and calm. Some said it was their eyes, which showed emotion in ways that other species could read. But Dr. Vel had a different theory. Humans are patient, she wrote in her final research paper on the subject. They do not demand trust. They simply offer presence. They sit, they wait, they stay. And in a galaxy full of species that are always moving, always chasing, always taking, that patience is rare. It is precious. It is, perhaps, the most human thing about them. When the cubs were finally ready to leave, Dohan went with them. The Volani homeworld was beautiful. Green forests stretched to the horizon. Rivers ran clear and cold through valleys filled with wildflowers. The sky was purple at dawn and gold at sunset. The Volani people welcomed them with quiet ceremony. They built a house for Dohan in a small valley near the mountains. Bomi, Taiyang, and Haniel stayed with him. They were adults now, tall and strong and beautiful, their fur shimmering with all the colors their species was known for. Bomi had cubs of her own after a few years. She brought them to meet Dohan one morning. 4 tiny creatures with golden eyes and curious faces. They crawled all over him, sniffing his hair and licking his hands and making small chirping sounds. You are their grandfather now, Bomi told him in her broken but improving Korean. She had been learning for years. They will grow up knowing your voice, your songs, your patience. Taiyang became a teacher. He taught young Volani the songs that Dohan had taught him, the old lullabies from a planet called Earth. The children loved them. They hummed them in the forests and sang them at festivals. The melodies spread across the homeworld, becoming part of the culture. Haniel became a guardian. He patrolled the borders of their territory, protecting the family he had chosen. Sometimes, Dohan would see him standing on a hilltop at sunset, watching the horizon with those fierce golden eyes. And sometimes Haniel would look back and nod, a small gesture that meant more than any words. Dohan grew old. His hair turned gray. His hands became wrinkled. He could not walk as far as he used to, could not sit on the floor for hours like he once did. But every evening, he sat on the porch of his little house and read his book. The same book about the fisherman and the sea. The pages were worn almost to nothing now, but he could recite the words from memory. And every evening, the cubs came. All of them. Bomi and Taiyang and Haniel, along with Bomi's children and their children. They gathered around him in a warm pile of fur and love, and they listened to the sound of his voice. Sometimes he read. Sometimes he hummed. Sometimes he just sat in silence, feeling their warmth against him. He had crossed the galaxy to find something to hold on to. He had found 3 broken cubs in a cold enclosure on a station between stars. He had given them patience and presence and time, and they had given him a home, not on Earth, not among his own kind, but here, on a purple-skied world at the edge of the galaxy, surrounded by creatures who loved him more than he had ever thought possible. Park Dohan closed his book and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, other humans were doing the same thing, sitting quietly, being patient, forming bonds that science could not explain. It was, he thought, what humans did best. They stayed. They waited. They loved. And the universe was better for it.